Hi, everybody.
Hi.
Hey.
Hi, I'm Chris. My name is Chris Luomanen. I'm a product designer, design researcher, and the principal of Think Tank, a little consultancy in San Francisco. I say I'm a product designer, but you know, we live in a world now where experience is the common denominator of everything. And so if we study and think about things in terms of experience, then we respond with the thing that's most appropriate to respond with. We don't come up with a product because we're a product designer. It's not software because we're a software developer. So that's a little bit about my perspective on that. And I'm here to talk about prototyping experiences. Now, a prototype for a thing is easy. You know, does this transmission transmit power to the rear wheels, right? In our case, our power to the rear wheels is experience. And our sweet spot at Think Tank is from insight to concept. So we want to understand people, and then instead of just saying what we learned about understanding people, we want to actually do something in response to that. And I'm going to show you a case study of that today. Prototyping experiences give us a little bit of both, right? We get to design and we get to do research. Making stuff that people really want is a complex problem. That should come as no surprise to anybody who's here. And there are lots of valid approaches to design research. My approach focuses on creating goals and constraints for design because that's my perspective, right? I'm on a hunt for clues about what to make. So we find folks who we think might be our potential customers for the thing. We want to know what kind of a thing they want, or maybe we want to know if they like the thing we made, or they like the thing we think we're going to make. So we ask them questions. The problem about questions with experience is that they don't make sense if you don't have an experience to refer to, right? I could ask 10,000 non-yak riders what kind of yak they prefer to ride, and I won't get any closer to the answer, right?
Brown.
Huh?
Brown.
Brown. How come?
I just like to call them.
You just like, and is that based on your yak riding experience, or are you just a brown riding kind
Brown riding kind of guy.
Right on. So that's, you know, we'll talk more about that. So your questions need to be responsive to people's depth of experience. Let's draw a line between people who are profoundly experienced at yak riding on the left and people who don't know what a yak is on the right. We line everybody up based on their level of experience with yak riding. People on the left have a greater depth of experience. They can tell you a lot more. They've been there. They've done that, right? So if we ask a person who's been riding yaks a bit, do you prefer to ride your yak bareback or with a saddle? They might have the depth of experience to tell you what's happened on different rides and what they thought about it. The question matches their depth of experience. But if we ask that same question of someone who doesn't have that experience, what we're really going to get is a whole lot of noise. They have answers. They're going to say stuff, right? They like brown, right? But it doesn't really teach us anything about the experience we're trying to create. Now, there are questions for that person that are within their depth of experience, right? If you ask, do you think you'd ever like to try riding a yak? That question is about anticipation and preconception. And if you're able to anticipate it, then you know something about it, right? But that very same question for someone a little further to the right, again, just yields a whole bunch of noise because they don't know what the hell you're talking about. They don't have the depth of experience to answer with the information that you desperately need. So each experience level has its own perspective, and your job as a researcher is to only ask the questions that match the subject's depth of experience, right? Because asking questions that are deeper than someone's depth of experience is called gathering noise. In fact, there are two sides to this coin. One is that you should always choose questions that match your subject's depth of experience, and the other is that your questions may call for different subjects. The questions that you have may mean you need to find different people to answer them, or you may need to make those people. That's what experience prototypes are about. Right? Where does that leave you if it's a disruptive experience that no one's had any experience with? What if nobody has any idea what you're talking about? Maybe it's a combination of things that they have experienced, but they haven't experienced that actual combination, right? Ordering on your phone and getting a cab. It's that nexus that's really interesting, and people will give you an answer if you ask them what they think of it, but it won't be very helpful. What we need to do is understand. Do we have to wait for that disruptive experience to be fully implemented before we can learn anything, right? That can cause a catch-22 where you need to understand an experience in order to design it, and you need to design the experience in order for anyone to have it. We have to create those experiences. Not the whole thing, just a prototype. And here's where you start. When you're designing an experience prototype, you have to know what questions you want to ask. That's the beginning. That's the most important part. Then you need to figure out how could people possibly answer these questions? What do they have to know in order to answer the question that you want to ask? And then once you figure that out, you basically ask yourself, how do we fake that? What kind of a puppet show can we put on? What can we do to bring some facsimile of that experience to life? Starting with a really crappy one, by the way. And then the last step is that you start bringing people in to live and interact with that experience, right? In 1770, a guy named Wolfgang von Klempen developed a machine that could play chess. It didn't really play chess. His machine, the Mechanical Turk, became famous when it won a bunch of challenging chess matches with a chess master hidden inside. This ruse actually played chess against Napoleon, where Napoleon cheated and the Mechanical Turk took its wooden arm and wiped all the chess pieces off the table. To everyone's great relief, Napoleon thought that was hilarious. If your goal was to understand how to make a machine that plays chess, this is a terrible prototype. But if your goal was to understand how people would respond to a machine that could play chess, it was an awesome prototype, right? And Napoleon was the user test. Making the machine was still at least 200 years away, right? So once you know what key aspects you're trying to deliver, once you know what the question is, you try to find a way to mock that up as quickly and cheaply as possible. And how quick and cheap should it be? Start super duper quick and cheap and go from there. You basically want to start as basic and simple and dumb and bad as you can and build it from there. As you invest more time into it, you'll start to see, oh, is this experience coming to life? So if you really just want people to get the idea of what you're talking about, you can bang out some sketchy storyboards like this. Now you're probably looking at these storyboards going, what the hell is going on there, right? This is good enough for a team. If you've got somebody that you can kind of talk them through it, then this kind of sketchy thing is okay, right? And when you up the resolution, it makes the concepts pop a lot more, and it makes the whole prototype more readable. Someone can get an idea of what this play area in a mall might be like from these really not that much better sketches than the Post-it ones. But you're still imagining it. You're still not interacting with it. You're still not living the experience. If your questions require more experience, then your prototype needs to get interactive. Here we are trying out service models for a fast food restaurant from both the customer and the employee's point of view. So what we did was we set up 3 big bays in a warehouse, taped out the shape of a fast food restaurant in it, and built a whole bunch of furniture out of foam core. We tested 4 different service models, 13 floor plans in about 3 days, running real people through it, and then finally the executives of the company through it. Now the way they would have normally done this is a bunch of people would have sat in a room and thought about it for a long time, then they would have built the whole thing full scale with all the branding in place and every little detail worked out. Working fast and cheap like this was much more fruitful because no one's going to come into that fully decked out, fully branded space and hack off a piece of the counter and turn that around. But when you keep it bad, you have that freedom, right? So as you go along, you want to start at the lowest level of resolution you can possibly stand and keep going until it starts to feel like it's coming to life. And no more, not even a little. And the main reason for that is that you want to be exploring lots of ideas in parallel. This is not part of a serial process where you have one idea and then you raise the resolution. That won't get you the answer. You have to have lots of bad ideas that you're gradually raising the resolution on as you're narrowing down the best ones. I work as a mentor for Highway 1, which is a startup accelerator here in the city. And I worked with a company now called Kiba and called LensBricks while they were getting accelerated. They had some very big questions that needed to be answered, and they were a little confused about how they were going to get there. Here's the story of how we built and studied their experience prototype. The Kiba team were experts in camera technology and machine learning with an interesting hypothesis. They believed that there were all kinds of big little moments happening in your house, right? Your kids are doing something adorable, the cats are chasing each other around. They figured something must be happening, and that those things are, we're not getting any pictures of those things now. Or, better still, maybe you get to be in front of the camera instead of behind it, right? So you see yourself interacting with your kid, instead of just seeing you taking a picture of your kid. Their hope was that there would be all these big little moments and we'd just sit back and take in this parade of awesomeness mined from our own homes without having to see any boring stuff. The way it works is that a camera is capturing what's happening, a machine learning computer is looking at the feeds and finding the best clips. The best clips are sent to you in a feed, and then you can't imagine how you lived without a device like Kiba before, because it's amazing. So there were some fundamental questions that this model begged. The first one, the biggest one, the elephant in the room was, does anything even happen in your house? If someone took pictures all the time, would they capture anything at all, right? And then, among the things that it could capture, how many things do we want to see? Right? And which are the ones we want to see? What's interesting? Why is it interesting? How is it interesting, right? And then we want to know, how do people want to consume those clips, right? You want to get 60 pictures of your cats running around the house a day? What is the... You can't even start to answer these questions on the right-hand side until the left-hand side questions get answered, right? So no big deal, we just get over some technical hurdles. We designed a custom camera and information storage system. We get a system of servers up. We write a bunch of algorithms that understand what an interesting moment is. And then we create custom UX and software to send all that stuff out to you. It's a big job. When we talked about, well, what would it take to do this, they said, about 3 years. 3 years from now, someone else is going to already be in that space. And there are lots of these photography without a photographer kinds of things happening. We needed to understand what's desirable before we invested in making them feasible. So we faked it. Our test was focused on just what pictures got taken, what was interesting, and what they meant to people. So we didn't care about any of that stuff. We set up drop cams in people's houses. We had humans looking through all their video and finding the stuff that they thought was good, which in itself was a practice for understanding what's good. And we put things, instead of creating a feed, we had a Instagram feed. Not their normal Instagram feed, we gave them a new Instagram feed of just their home videos, right? So we got 10 recruits. We set up cameras in their houses for 10 days. Actually, before we did any of this, we set up a drop cam focused on my parakeet. And we made the whole, we had just a Mr. Go cam, and we tried to see does anything happen in the parakeet's world that's interesting, just to see if we had all the steps of our process in place, right? So we did a really crappy prototype to start off with. Then we started to, we went into users' houses and we set up the cameras, and while we were there, we had an hour-and-a-half discussion about photography, cameras, the moments in their life that are worth capturing, their relationships with the people in their houses, things that match their level of experience now, which is, I've never had an automated camera take pictures of me in my own house, right? So all the questions that fall below that threshold we could ask, and we learned a lot. Then we had them experience feeds for 10 days, and then we came back and met with them, talked to them about what they saw, and watched some of the most interesting feeds with them.
Could we not have done a less expensive version of it using security cameras?
The drop cam was the most effective in terms of our time to get it all done, because you could capture the video. There were a bunch of reasons why. Drop cam just was a security camera that was easy to hack. So essentially we were doing that. We're trying to. So, big question. Did anything happen in people's homes? To our great surprise and relief, yes. Lots of things were happening, but if nothing was happening, that would have been just as important to discover. Absolutely. The thing about a hypothesis like this is that it's not a bet. You're not betting that it's going to work, because if you bet that it's going to work, you're distorting your perception of what's happening, because you're really only looking for happy responses, right? But what we learned was that even what we thought was interesting was different from what the users found were interesting, and the aspects of the things that we found interesting were different from what the users found interesting. For example, we had a bunch of footage of this woman's dogs whining during the middle of the day. And we're like, oh, it's kind of sad, I don't know if we should put that in there, right? She sees the footage of her dogs whining and bursts into laughter, right? She thinks it's hilarious. She goes, oh, those drama queens. Just stop it, right? So this apparently understandable moment actually had a completely different contextual, it was contextualized totally differently by her. And it was something only she could have known, right? The next question is, what do they want to see? Go ahead.
I just have a question in terms of bias. For these people, I mean, I'm just wondering, because we've done a lot of user interviews as well, and people just want to please you sometimes.
Yeah.
And they want to just say, oh, okay, you're expecting me to watch all these feeds and tell you that they're interesting.
Yep.
So how did you sort of normalize for that, I guess?
You don't. You don't normalize for bias. Qualitative design research is literature, not math. You try to understand and analyze what they mean when they say what they say, not just recording what they say. So the answer is you don't normalize for that. Just as we didn't reach any hard and fast conclusions for any of this. Again, this is a hunt for clues. And the more we tighten our grip on what we know, the less we're able to grab qualitatively.
Right, but I guess the question I have is rather not to be so strong, right, not mathematical, but is there a way of phrasing the questions or the interviews to say, okay, so there's a possibility you might not find anything interesting, but let us know if...
Yes, there's an easy way to do that. You say, what did you think of this clip?
So
How did that, you sound like a therapist, how'd that make you feel? What was interesting about it? Or how did you feel about it? Then you say, why did you feel that way you felt about it? You try to ask open-ended questions for sure. You don't want to say, was this incredibly interesting or just a little bit interesting? Right? To your point. Right? That's what you're saying. So open-ended questions. And as someone who's watched way too many hours of myself giving interviews, I do that all the time. I'm saying, how did you think that changed your perspective? Right? I start to ask a question that's almost like that, and you try to back out of it. But really, you're just doing your best to not bias and to create a space. A person who knows a lot more about this than I, the great and powerful Jane Fulton Surrey, once said that user research has two goals. One is to get other people to open up to you and show their true self to you. And two, for you to have the openness to hear what they say when they say it. And that is really the only method I know of to do that, to eliminate bias. Is you really, and it sounds very hippy-dippy, right? You're getting other people to open up to you, and you are opening yourself up to what they're really saying, not what you hope they're saying. And that's a journey. It doesn't happen quickly, right? So, what clips do people want to see? The answer is that the more personally contextual they were, the more interesting they were. So, for example, one of the subjects in this was a friend of mine. He happens to work at Highway 1, and he agreed to have the camera set up in his house. He and I are fellow car nerds, so we've worked on cars together, and I saw this footage of his son pick up a toy car, and he took a hammer, and he started hitting it. And as I've seen his father hit a hammer on a car as well. So I thought that was hilarious, like father, like son, right? There they are, beating their cars with a hammer. So I was in on that. I was in on that side of it. I was in on the joke. But most of the time we weren't, right? And that's a challenge, right? That's one of those things where it's not a home run. They face a big challenge because what does make sense now? That I don't want to get too deep into the answer, but the answer is you let people tell you, right? You have to mine them for the information of what their specific personal preferences are. When and how do you consume those clips? How do you want to share them, right? People didn't look at the feed very often. And we were like, oh, this is terrible, right? They're not looking at the feed. We could track whether they were looking at the feed or not. How often do you look? Oh, twice a day, 3 times a day. We knew they hadn't looked at it until the evening before we were meeting with them the second time. So people were peeking in at it, but they weren't consuming it the way they consume social media and stuff like that. And the ways so there are a bunch of ways to solve this problem, to condense the feed that I probably shouldn't talk about, but that's how we responded to that answer that we got. What are the high-level takeaways when people see their lives in a new way, right? We heard a lot of trepidation about people seeing themselves or seeing someone naked, right? And the truth is that when you dug beneath that veneer, right? So someone says, oh, I wouldn't want them to see me running from the shower. Right? And you say, oh, well, how often do you run from the shower? Like, is that really the thing? As we got deeper into getting them to open up to us, over and over, people kind of realize that being on camera is just like being in a social situation in a way. You feel like you have to keep up appearances, right? You're not going to drool or spill stuff on yourself, right? You're not quite fully relaxed. And that lack of relaxation was stressful, right? And that was a deep learning about privacy. Another hypothesis that the team had was that if we stored all the video locally on the device, that would give people peace of mind about having their videos stolen. Well, what we learned was that security just means I trust you until you do something bad to me, and then I stop trusting you. That's how people's trust systems work. You can, even with wonky people, you can get into the details of how technically it was harder to steal your videos. Really, they just don't screw me over, and I'll trust you. And although the system was meant to capture special moments, the potential for spying was not lost on anyone, right? Part of that is because people still see these cameras in a security context, right? Even people who, we had one subject who was like, oh, I get this, it's a shoebox, and when I open it up 3 years from now, I'm going to see all these pictures of my daughter doing cute things she doesn't do anymore. And I mean, he was like the textbook guy that you want to see that's saying all kinds of good things about your hypotheses. And we're watching the video and he goes, and God, does anyone feed the damn cats? So even though he saw it completely from that perspective, the urge to spy is pretty deep. People can't resist, right? In short, we learned a lot without investing a lot, by building just enough so that people had the depth of experience to tell us what we needed to know, and then we go back to the drawing board and develop the next prototype. So the question I have for you guys is, what questions do you want to be asking? How do you start your prototype process? And I've done this exercise I'm about to do with you guys with a bunch of people at Highway 1, and now actually I do it with my regular clients too. The idea is to figure out what you should be figuring out. What are the questions? Then you figure out what experiences, then you figure out how to get the people through them, right? So here's how it goes. First, some ground rules. When I was at IDEO, we used to say defer judgment. The truth is, you don't have to defer judgment, just shut up, right? Don't say negative stuff. It's a generative session. Only add, don't argue. If someone says something idiotic, come up with a concept that is the opposite of idiotic and offer that concept up, right? Build on the ideas of others. It's not an originality contest, right? So if you have an idea that's just a little bit different from someone else, don't go, well, Steve kind of said that. I don't. Get in there, keep exploring the nuances, get a shade away from the color someone else just described, right? You need to make big lists. People say, well, how long should your lists be? If it doesn't hurt, it's not working. The best things on your list will happen in the last 20% of your listing time. So when it starts to hurt, you're maybe halfway through, right? A lot is the answer, because that's once the point of having a generative session like this is to get it out of your head onto the board so that you can move on to the next thing. Then you just need to whiteboard your team members and 1 hour. We're going to make 2 lists. List number 1 is, what are your guiding hypotheses, right? What are the things you hope people will say about your company? This is easy because you're startup people. You cannot stop talking about this stuff, right? These are all the things. This is how it's going to change the world. These are all the really great things it's going to do. And you'll probably have maybe 10 or 15 of those, and then maybe 10 or 15 more in, it'll start to hurt. Now you're getting somewhere, right? So make a big list of how your product, all the good things that you want people to say about your product, service, software, whatever it is. And then do the opposite. And this is the thing that is harder for people to do, because they feel like if they say the thing that they don't want to have happen, somehow it might make it happen, right? That by mentioning the negative thing that could happen, you're going to bring it on. But this actually is really, really, really important. You know, this was the list that had, does anything even happen in anyone's house on it, right? So you keep doing this. until it hurts. 20 minutes is a decent start. So for Kiva, it would be, you know, someone would steal my videos, or nothing interesting happens in my house. Okay, now figure out take a look at your two lists and think about how well do you understand these hypotheses, right? The ones that you feel you don't really understand, the ones that are most ripe for exploration, put a circle in front of them. And then figure out what the most pivotal hypotheses are. These are the things that will make you or break you, right? Both positive and negative. Mark them with an X. Everything with an X and O in front of it needs investigation, right? It's that simple. And the point of doing a long list is that these people are often surprised that they're not the things that were top of mind, right? They're not the things that they would have thought of coming right into the session. So that's my little trick. Once you know what your problems are, you imagine a world where you can do anything you want, right? You have all the software and engineers and people and prototyping facilities. And it's sort of the opposite of the making the worst thing and gradually upping the resolution. Start with a thing that is at maximum resolution and start pulling your experience prototype back from that, right? Keep pulling until you think you can actually do it, and then start building it. So they told me this was a 30-minute talk, and I did it in 30 minutes. I hope you guys have questions. There's my address if you're interested in learning more about Kiva, or you're interested in learning more about experience design and prototyping. There's my email. Anybody have any questions?
What surprising things did you learn from the fast food study?
What surprising things did we learn? We learned that the ways that they were, the model that they had where you line up, order your food, and then go to a place I don't know what it is. Is it over here? They're going to bring it to the counter. That confusion about where to go while you wait for your food was the disaster, and it was something that no one was even thinking about questioning. It's just the way they'd always done it. And there was a ton of work being done on the actual time people spend waiting. Like, oh, if we can just shave seconds off the time they spend waiting. What you really just want to do is get them out of a situation where they don't know what the hell is happening and they're having a minor anxiety attack.
That's funny because that happens at almost every fast food restaurant.
Not this one.
Like,
Any? Yes?
Do you find that when people are, when you're, for example, when you're talking about the response to videos, or do you find that the person's comments or sort of interest level changes throughout the process? Like maybe the first two they're excited, and then they find another one that's far more exciting, and then they like want to downgrade the latter one because they realize,
Yeah, no, it changes over time, and you're just trying to be open to why is it changing, what's happening now, right? Did we hit on something? Can I ask a question that sounds super obvious? Like, we're so used to in our lives, you don't want to seem dumb, right? So you make assumptions about what someone said. But when you're doing this kind of work, you really want to ask a bunch of really, really dumb questions about the thing they just said to find out the answers to why did they get more interested? Why did they get less interested? Is this just them being tired of looking at videos? It's all about asking these questions that where you don't assume. Yes?
You were saying that when you were looking at the videos, people weren't looking at the video stream very often. When you found that out, I guess, how did you kind of resolve whether this was just a value proposition problem or if it was like just a design problem in the way that you were delivering? Did you kind of do like more research in that area? Or?
We did do more research in that area. how did we figure out? We don't know what the problem is. What we did was we looked at that problem and we saw a bunch of things. One, it's not as rich as a social media feed, right? So social media feed for the day, mine's not that long, but you know, it's pretty long, right? Social media feed for this was this big. So it doesn't have that snacky, always grabbing a thing. It's a different moment, and so what we tried to do was understand the moments where they did look at it. It was like a reflection time, or it was a being thankful for your lifetime, or right? So we wanted to reorganize the video clips in a way that would be more fitting for the use cases, or what we thought would be more fitting, and then we test those. Yes?
I'm wondering if you might share a story about a prototype that you thought was good when you designed it, but wasn't so good afterwards.
Oh, that's a great question.
Or any kind of, yeah, because I know from my own experience, building prototypes is really hard, because sometimes you think you have something and then realize it's way too complicated.
I really like those prototypes though. Like the ones that break are the most useful ones, and that's why I'm always saying to people, you know, kind of, if we're designing a fast food restaurant, right? What does the service model look like where everyone is seated and a waiter comes with a, well, you can't do that, so there's no point looking at it. Yeah, but what if we did? Where would it break? So in the fast food example, we did that. We built a model where everybody went to a table and had their orders taken. And it wasn't fast enough, but little aspects of it were so much better that we could, even the broken ones have little diamonds in them that you can pick out and put in your next idea. So you want them to fail because how they fail gives you a clue. I'm trying to think of another. That's a good example of that. I'm sorry. Okay. Yes?
Did you do any, I know we talked a little bit about math, but did you do any math or quantitative measurements during your experiment that you described?
You could, but it would be massively expensive, right? If you want to do, so I've seen people come up and they'll say, well, after we changed this feature, and they'll have two graphs like, this was customer dissatisfaction and this was customer satisfaction, and then after we did the feature, it looked like this. And you look at the scale of the graph and the difference between this and this is 3 people, right? That's often what you end up seeing. And you know, in order to pass a p-test or a t-test, in order to have any standard deviation worth talking about,
10 people wasn't enough.
you need a lot of people. And you know, that's really the difference between an exercise that tries to quantify and this kind of hunt for clues qualitative process. They're really different, and they have different purposes. A lot of people do qualitative research, and then they show that the graph of 5 people change, and the whole thing just makes me itch because I'm waiting for someone who actually understands math to come in the room and go, what the hell is that? So, not here is the answer. Yes?
This is more just that maybe you can react to a technique that has been working well for us. We've been actually having people drag along a friend, because then you find that the friend calls BS on the interviewer. On the interviewee, there's less pompousness, so that's just one I'd share up. I don't know if you've done the same thing, but I find it really works. You actually try to play that interaction up between the two of them, so you get to a more kind of real.
Right, and if you can, if the person becomes more open with their friend being there, that's an awesome technique. If the person wants to please the friend,
Right.
then it gets difficult. A similar thing that I like to do is I say, this stuff was designed by those guys in the other silo of my company, right? You can't hurt our feelings no matter what you say about them. It's not always completely true, right? But you do want to give people an out or some way for them to not be so pressured by their own niceness. Yes?
Thinking about budget, how important is like a physical interview and physical connection versus like completely digital, and is it dependent on the prototype or the end result that you think you're going to get to?
If we're talking about qualitative interview stuff, I don't do anything that's less than an hour and a half long. because we're still, if you don't, then you don't offer any places for things to kind of eddy out, right? You're like, meat and potatoes. We got to talk about these things and we're getting them done. And unless you have that space, people can't feel comfortable enough to tell their stories. And I get this kind of pressure all the time from companies. They're like, can't you just put 5 of them in a room together and bang them out? And I have assented to that, but I don't anymore.
And what about the like physical on location versus like a video?
Anything that ups the level of experiential context. So if we had the camera in a focus group room, right? Obviously that's a bad scenario, right? But oftentimes if you're talking about, so I was doing a project on Bluetooth speakers, right? You got to do that in people's houses and their garages and their workstations and everywhere where Bluetooth speakers get used. Because that's where you see the, oh, did you know you already have speakers in here? Right? Like, if you weren't there, you wouldn't have gotten that context. And that's when they start the story of, oh yeah, remember how I was telling you what an audiophile I am? They see that they have speakers and they go, it's true. I just put my phone on and put it down on the table. Sometimes I put it in a cup. They admit that the context, allows them to open up. So I always, anything that adds context, I try to do, even like in this where we kind of make the context ourselves. Yes?
And how is the process different between hardware and software?
How's the difference between hardware and software?
Yeah.
What's the difference between experiencing hardware and software? I don't think there's any difference between experiencing hardware and software. You're having an experience. So that's what we're trying to break it. That's the common denominator of environments, services, products, software, mobile apps. What I'm trying to say is it's all experience. So if you're capturing the experience, and maybe part of that software is that you're always sitting at a desk, or maybe part of that software is, Instagram assumes you're always out taking a picture, or you're somewhere where you're going to take a picture. It might be software plus the context, just the same way it might be product plus the context. Does that make sense? You just want to know what the experience is.
Yeah, and design research person. Is that any different?
I do the same kind of work for both, and oftentimes now it's all a continuum, right? Product, service, environment. Well, not environment so much, but it's software and it's a product, or it's software and it's a service, or there's usually some software in there somewhere, right? Yes.
What do you do in an interview situation if somebody's getting off topic? Do you steer them back into the question, or do you let them build up on it?
Terrific question. Depends on the person. Some people are finding a thing, and you really just have to have a nose for sniffing that out. Again, it's Jane's principle, right? Are they going off on a thing where is the thing they're going off on them exploring the experience in their mind? In which case, let them roll. And I often I have a person who I work with a lot who I love because she's the one who's always like, shh, right? Let them ramble, because I could be like, meat potatoes, right? So it depends on why they're rambling. And what I do is if the rambling turns out to be bad, unproductive rambling, then I let them ramble less and less and less each time they ramble. So it depends on what they're doing. Yes?
I feel like in general Americans are probably used to the idea of testing or focus groups. Have you done any internationally, and have you seen any differences?
I have done research in Korea, which is very different because, like I was saying, you ask all these questions that where you're foregoing your assumption, right? Did you clean that up because you like your floor to be clean? You ask these questions, and I actually got to, Koreans get very tired of that, is what I learned. They do not love to be asked assumption-free questions. It doesn't make sense. But I think that it's harder to make the kind of judgments like I was talking about before through a translator. So I've done Mexico as well. It's hard to open yourself up through a translator as much. But yeah, I've been called a 3-year-old. Why? Because you always want to ask the why after why after why after why question, right? Obviously, right? So that some cultures are more tolerant to that than others, but it's not that different, I don't think. Yes?
I'm brand new to this, and I was fortunate to do a nonprofit project with Google, UXers. And what was really interesting for me, and I'd love to get your input on that, is it was a piece of software, everybody sort of knew it. Everybody had fun. Oh, I would love a button there. Commenting on the features, and it just seemed like when that happened, they didn't necessarily want a button there. It was speaking to maybe a bigger need. So, I mean, just are there some things like that that you sort of see pretty standardly, and if someone says X, like, I really want this feature, it might be indicate something different?
Right, and that's another one of these 5 whys kind of situations, right? So why do you want why are you at the Lean Startup? I'm at the Lean Startup because I want to be an entrepreneur. Why do you want to be an entrepreneur? 5 whys into that, you're going to learn something really interesting about that person. And I think approaching those button questions the same way. It's my experience that there are a lot of people who go into qualitative research situations really, really hoping that the user's going to design their product for them. And sometimes when they get someone who wants to, they're like, oh, yes, this is it, right? But the why is what's interesting. I think that, people are having a thing, I want a button here, why? Because it was the first thing, because that's the first place I look. Well, maybe that gives you an idea that the first place they look is actually on the page before or something like that, right? So it's all about the reasons people have feelings, which they're terrible at articulating. Most people are. Some people are amazing at it. But that's really what you don't want to know where they put the button. You want to know what the intent is behind their urge to put the button there. Yes.
How do you isolate from the fact that sometimes the customers that are more willing to speak are not the most representative of your user target base? Like, people asking to give them McDonald's products, and then you sell 1% of what you expected to sell because they were not really representative.
Well, here's the good news. Qualitative user research doesn't have to be representative. We don't have to hit a median person to get good information. In fact, a lot of outlying people have lots of really good information. So we don't, is the answer, right? And this is what I'm saying about literature versus science. We're not trying to find the person who's right in the middle of some imaginary mean, right? We want to take the people we have and learn what we can from them, because we're not taking that information in order to then ship a product the next day based on that information. We're gathering that information from them so that we can rethink our prototype and test it again, right? Because if we had to find those median people, we would it's too expensive. It's too hard to find those median people. And does that make sense? You're not, I hate the word validation, and I know a lot of people use it in a really good way, right? But this is a creative endeavor, and you're trying to fuel that creativity. You're trying to come up with ways to stimulate people to think about how to design differently. You're not trying to hit a spot, because there's no spot. There's no right answer. There's a cluster of right answers, right? And it's the designer's job to find some of the good ones. There's not a 100% correlation spot, so I don't worry about it. Yes.
Can you speak a little bit about finding people? I saw on your slide it was like friends and Craigslist.
It's a nightmare to find people.
Like that?
It is a total nightmare. If you use places that are recruiting services, you get the same damn people over and over again. Talk about not hitting the middle of your median, right? There are people who are professional subjects, and they're like, yeah, I love golf and tennis and baseball and software, and right? They love all that stuff. You gotta use your gut. You know what's you wanna know a trick? I got a great trick. Video self-interview. If you can get people who, and I'm not saying you don't want to even get close to the middle, right? You want to get people who are pretty close to being a customer. I'm not saying you can take anyone for anything, right? You want to try to get close. But once people are inside of your circle of possibilities, ask each and every one of them to make a video self-interview where they answer 3 questions. You'll know all the good ones and all the bad ones when you see those videos. I've used DScout, which is a mobile app that does that. If your people are sufficiently tech savvy, there are a bunch of other ones that are mainly designed for the HR world. They're like self-job interview apps, so there are other ones I haven't used those yet, but I've had them used on me. You know, get a sample of them talking about an open-ended thing, and you'll be able to smell the big ones. Yes?
Do you have strategies around when you get contradictory information from the same person?
Yes, the strategy is that people are contradictory, and they really sometimes mean both of those things. And that if you're hoping that people are clear about these things, you're going to be super frustrated. I think the answer is why was the information contradictory? What were they really saying when they said 2 different things? Right? What was going through their head the first time? What was going through their head the second time? And are there any clues? And these interviews are improvisations, and so hopefully you're using that to furiously write down new questions, right? You never want to say, hey, well, not never. Sometimes, near the very end of the interview, right, that's when all bets are off. That's when you start saying, you know, at the beginning of the interview, you said that you love every picture of your cat, and then we showed you these pictures of your cat that you really found boring. What was the difference? What was the nuance there, right? You don't ask it in the which is the truth, liar? Right? You say, what was happening there? What was going on with you? Understand that we are also clusters, right? We're not one thing ever. And so we're going to be inconsistent a lot of the time. Yes?
So here's the thing. So Eric in the book talks about focus groups not being very effective, we shouldn't use focus groups. So I get the idea of using focus groups to fast or like prototype about fast food restaurant and see how they actually
That wasn't a focus group.
Okay, that was an actual.
That was a design prototype.
Prototype.
Yep. And we would never have run real customers through it either.
Okay. But with the key.
Because they'd say, well, does it have to be white? Right? That's the kind of thing a customer would say. Are you really going to serve me an empty box? Right? So that's where that resolution thing, it drives what audience you can show your prototype to.
So here's the thing with the key ones. Eric always talks about the value proposition or value hypothesis and growth hypothesis. And the importance of making your customer actually say how much you want to spend, how much customer want to spend. So the key, for example, you're refining posters of cats, etc. At what point do you actually say how much you're willing to pay if you have this product today, would you sign it now? Because that's a focus group, so the key example.
Yeah, I don't usually ask people how much they want to pay for things. I'm usually trying to design the thing. And honestly, at the level at that level, and people are always like, make sure before you go, ask them how much they pay for it. And it's like, right? The answer is I don't usually do that because, look, I'm not saying that my design methodology is good. My design methodology is design methodology of a designer. I want to use this to actually go and design stuff. That's what I want to get out of it. I'm not actually looking at it as globally as every aspect of marketing and stuff like that. But if I did have to do that, I would. I talk about this. The way the interview should work is you're spiraling in to the question you want to ask, right? So at the outer edge of the spiral, you're like, where are you from? What do you do? What do you do for fun? What would your friends say about you, right? And then you start talking about their experience with photography or what do they think of food, right? You're gradually moving in. Does that make sense? You don't just go right for the key question you want to ask because they haven't built up context in their own minds of what they think. And so if I were asking a how much would you pay question, I would start by spiraling around how much they pay for a whole bunch of things. I would start by talking about something that was very tangentially, if at all, related. And then I would gradually bring my questions around to how much they pay for things and what is your thought process? How do you decide how much you're going to pay for things, right? I would ask all those kinds of questions before I got to that inner part of it. And actually, the questions in the outside of the spiral might tell you more than the answer you thought you wanted to hear. You might learn more about their thought process along the way than 99 cents or $1.99 or $10.99.
Let's talk the price issue and the cost issue. Where will you go next? So you videotape it, you have another video, you personally start there.
Yep. Yep.
You know, that's your first iteration, your first MVP.
Yep.
As the saying, you're registered.
Yep.
You have an issue in the fact that it's really nice because you like one because they like and vice versa.
Yep.
How are you going to map that out? Then how are you going to make it into a product that's actually going to be viable?
So we need to look at the overall use case, right? The next prototype would address kind of where do you put the camera, where does the camera live in your life? Because we were kind of like, oh, where are you most of the time? Bloop. Right? We just there's a lot more to learn about where these things happen, and I would want to learn them experimentally. There are a lot of things about finding good videos. We learned a lot about what finding good videos means, but there's a lot more to learn about how to draw out of them what context they're excited about. And then can super smart machine learning people make those blogs that are doing this? Can they recognize that that's the thing people like? You try to both incrementally up the experience and also up the resolution of what the camera is going to be doing. That's the next step. You take these learnings, you say, we don't know that these are true. These are not true facts, right? These are things that we heard people say. If we act on them and we show people the things that we did, that's the closest thing to validating I want to talk about. Does that make sense? Anything else?
Well, yes, this is a product. It sounds like it would sort of be pioneering it, sort of a new kind of category.
Yeah.
And so, do you have a different approach when you're doing that as opposed to something that would be repetitive?
Yeah, absolutely. Like so, for in the Bluetooth speaker example, right? We after we talked about how people feel about audio and technology, after we had them take a picture of every single thing they listened to through the day, right? So for 5 days they had to go around. I turned on the radio in my car. I take a picture. I listened to a podcast on my computer. I took a picture of my computer. You get more granular quicker. Right? But you still try to kind of spiral towards the answer And when you get to that end of when you get to the middle of the spiral, also known as the end of the interview, that's when you open up your bag full of competitive products and you put them all on the table. And the first thing you say is, what do you think? And then you start asking questions about style, color, sound, reputation, personality, etc. Right? So you save all that stuff for the end, because at the end, you've already learned a ton of stuff about this person. You have a lot of things to push back on. You've got a lot of new ways to formulate your questions when it's time for action and you get all the competitive products out. So it's a little bit different. It's a little bit different, but it's the same basic idea. Okay, thank you very much.